Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. And speaking of Total Party Skills, I guess we're going to talk a little bit today about the Total Party system, since people periodically ask if I could make a video on the subject, so here we go. The basic concept behind the rule system is that it's trying to strip role-playing game rules down to the bare minimums of what you actually really need to actualize your character's actions in a role-playing game. All the basic actions and attacks and such that you can do in the Total Party system all involve the same game mechanic. You have a number of six-sided dice based on the amount of attribute points that the character and or NPC has. Those form a dice pool. You roll those dice. You want to beat a target number, which is the difficulty. If you have a skill bonus that's relevant to what you're attempting, you add that skill bonus to your final roll, not to the number of dice, but to the number the roll generates. And if that is higher than the difficulty number, success. The idea is that it both gives players a much more unrestrictive way of playing that rewards their creativity for coming up with ways to use their skills and attributes in interesting combinations. And it also hands a lot of power back to game masters, who are the ultimate arbiters of whether or not an action is even possible and what the difficulty is. So instead of having a whole litany of different powers available for someone who has access to psychokinesis, instead they will have a psychokinesis skill, and if they think of something they want to try with it, fine, you get to set the difficulty number, and if they do not have a high enough attribute to back it up and they don't have enough skill points in psychokinesis, they might not be able to generate the effect. So it's kind of in your hands to firewall whether or not players are able to accomplish something that you don't want them to be able to accomplish yet at their level of power at this or at the stage in the adventure that they're on, while at the same time giving them the potential, though, to come up with things that you, me, or anyone else might not have necessarily occurred could be used with clairvoyance, or with the science skill, or with perception, and all that other kind of stuff. There's not a whole ton of skills, so theoretically it should be easy to, get them all memorized in a fairly short amount of time, so you can do rulings and call, what action attribute skill combinations are going to be on the fly without having to constantly stop and look at the book and all that kind of stuff. Skills are arranged into a bunch of little subcategories called schools. Each school has 3 skills tied to it. Most of the skills, it's fairly obvious which attribute they're going to be paired with most of the time, but as stated, you can mix and match them given certain unique circumstances. Once again, it's up to the game master to decide whether or not, perception plus body makes any sense. Each attribute has an associated status. The 3 different kinds of status are basically hit points, except only one of them involves the character's actual physical health, the health status. There's also a status for sanity and morale. By having a status for sanity and morale, these rules accomplish something that a lot of games lack, and it's the ability to create tension in non-combat scenes, in dialogue scenes in particular. Because characters and NPCs, if they have high enough attributes and the appropriate skills, can launch a verbal attack. They could potentially whittle down their sanity and morale, which suddenly means that there's an actual stake at hand if characters get themselves involved in a confrontation that doesn't necessarily come to blows, but is still sour, and could potentially be used as a way to curb players to, learn to be a little bit more respectful of the NPCs they encounter, realizing that those NPCs could potentially retaliate and then damage their character. A character that loses their sanity and loses their morale is just as unplayable as a character that loses all their health and dies. Characters also have a few limits, stuff like their encumbrance or their movement rates. A few unique character types that are non-humans might have additional limits, such as like winged flight or a swimming speed or some sort of faster digging speed and stuff like that. But for the most part, most characters will just have encumbrance and then 2 different kinds of movement rates. You have your combat move, which is how far you can move on a single turn, and then you have your move travel limit, which is basically how many miles your character can get before they have to potentially stop and rest if they fail a focus action. The three main attributes are body, mind, and spirit. Each of these has a skill category that's devoted specifically to those attributes so that you can, more personalize exactly how you want your mind, spirit, body to have manifested. You can put points in strength or agility or beauty for body. You can lean on knowledge or the ability to use technology or perception for mind. And with spirit, you get charisma, empathy, and focus. There's also categories for combat skills, strange skills, which is because in more primitive settings, people having a high education is considered strange. And so these are your skills that you would largely have to have had a collegiate background to really have any particular training in: art, languages, and science. And then there's the special skill categories, which you could also think of as the magical skill categories. This is martial, which is your actual martial arts. Instead of actual skills, martial art bonuses are instead applied to your combat abilities, so that they kind of present a natural ongoing buff to either your ability to hit something or to your defense abilities. And then there are psionics, divine, and occult skills, your more traditional types of magic. Psionics has clairvoyance, telepathy, and psychokinesis. Divine is blessing, healing, and exorcism. And occult is demonology, metamorphosis, and necromancy. Blessings have some limits on how often you can use them. Psionics are actually pretty freewheeling and they're reliable, but they have fairly limited applications. And occult skills is where you actually can have much more creativity, but they're kind of designed specifically to be a bit of a pain in the ass to attain. Characters with the occult skills will create spells, but it takes time to craft a spell, at which point they will have to make a roll to see if they successfully craft the spell. And the length of time they spend on practicing, studying, and preparing the spell before they make that final craft roll will determine how hard it is for them to cast that spell from that point afterwards, after they have it locked down and memorized. So if you spend a whole year practicing a spell, you can cast it much easier than someone who tries to, develop a spell overnight for an emergency situation. It's also possible to max out the amount of spells you can memorize and kind of get yourself locked until you reach another level of experience so that you can purposely forget one so you can learn a new one. And otherwise, you're just stuck having to raise either your knowledge skill or your mind score in order to be able to gain more memory slots for more spells. Now, the main rulebook has a ton of example spells, covering most of the basics of how you would use these various occult skills, but it is stated that players are encouraged to come up with spells on their own, and once again, it's up to the game master to determine whether or not the spell is plausible, if too overpowered, and to set the difficulty for the craft roll. Plus, they have to actually take the time to have their character spend 6 months developing a spell just so they can cast it at hard difficulty and stuff like that. Now, obviously, not all these skills are going to work in all settings. In your more sci-fi settings, you're going to typically see, divine and occult skills kind of get dropped out and more of a focus just on psionics or maybe even martial skills. And my martial arts handbook does a thing where instead of just only having martial skills, a true martial artist focuses those skills in conjunction with other skills that they've been trained in as a form in order to be able to unlock special abilities. So I would recommend checking out the Total Party System Martial Arts Handbook and other titles of mine that you can see on DriveThruRPG or Amazon.com if you want them in print. So until next time, I guess there you go. The basic gist of how the Total Party System, the most genius system you will ever encounter in life, has been written. So that's it. Get on out of here, scamp, and stay waspinated. Whoa, hey, it's It's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. We're going to talk a little bit more today about the contents of Girls Gone Vampire. Girls Gone Vampire is a romantic horror RPG setting for use with the Total Party System Rules Handbook, as pictured here. Set in the mid-1950s, Girls Gone Vampire portrays a fictionalized version of noir York City. Player characters can include a wide range of options, various different kinds of vampires, people who own magic items, vampire cult initiates, vampire hunters. And with the various sourcebooks made for Girls Gone Vampire, options can be expanded to include vampire companions, tabloid journalists, death cultists, other rarer forms of vampires, and some monstrous races such as devils, as well as ghosts and living dead, and even a few ninjas if you keep your eyes out for them. Girls Gone Vampire has sourcebooks for adventures, additional character options, rules, and a variety of potential antagonists for your own adventures and campaigns. Girls Gone Vampire does not hold its punches when it comes to either romance or horror. The vampires in this setting, while they may be alluring, are still dangerous, murderous creatures, and those who seek them out are almost always damned for their foolishness. Vampire muses, werecats that steal their victims' breath, a circle of druidesses, serial killer vampire urges, and so much more awaits if you get yourself a copy of Girls Gone Vampire today. Available on DriveThruRPG in PDF format or in print on Amazon.com. See links in description box below.